How you doing? Thanks for joining us. Thought I'd give you a little behind the scenes video of the actual recording of the podcast, the Between Two Wheels podcast. This is episode 20. And in today's podcast, well, I'm going to give you a snippet. It's about 7 minutes, a little brief portion of the recording today, but parts that are not covered in the video that you can actually look at in the entire podcast below. There's links to it. Is coffee. Will it make you faster? Nate Dunn, Coach Nate Dunn of Data Driven Athlete has a portion of that, a lead into the video. We talk about mechanical doping. You'll see that in the video. We talk about Phil Gaimon's book, Draft Animals. Whether I'm going to do a book report on it or not, that's details to come. But maybe I'll spend the money so you don't have to. And then if it's worth your time and money, what I think, then go ahead and purchase it. Anyway. Thought you might enjoy this. Just a little bit, one more thing about how I do this process. What I do is I come up with topics that I think are interesting, pass them around with Curt and Chris. It's just me on this one today. But then I don't do a script. I just do an outline. Maybe I'll have statistics that I need to reference, maybe a news article that I'm going to read a little bit from, but then I just freeform from there. So what you have today and what you have every time is exactly that. And I hope you enjoy. And feedback, okay? Thanks. Welcome to another exciting broadcast of the Between Two Wheels podcast. This is your host, Tyler Janke, episode 20. Thank you for joining us today. I hope everyone's had a good week and is getting rolled into their winter training regimens, maybe your time off, a little more time to eat and explore the wonders of weight loss coming up in the next few months. All right, 43-year-old Category 3 French cyclist was caught with a mechanically aided bicycle while in competition. This was the first such incident reported in France. The investigation was initiated by tips into the French police and the French anti-doping agency, the AFLD. Christophe Bassins, a former pro cyclist, took the investigation and eventually the actual takedown of the local race after the older cyclist tried to get away. And by the way, at the race of his eventual demise, he was in the break with a junior rider, and when the number of spectators at this race seemed to be too high. Here is what we know, as told to cycling podcast Daniel Freeb, who also translated it from French to English. I'm bringing this out of my head kind of from what I remember of the interview, so don't quote me on this, but go ahead and quote me. 1. The preliminary investigation revealed that the cyclist typically rode a bike worth around €8,000 in that range, and then the bike he started to ride when he was being suspected of bike doping was worth about $250. This was an initial tip-off of why are you using a bike, such great difference in the cost from what you normally use. Secondly, the bottle in videos that were submitted to Mr. Bassins, Christophe, during the races, he always had the one bottle in there positioned in the exact same place, and they had an emblem on there, and it was never moved or never rotated, and the bottle wasn't used. Secondly, there were some strange wires protruding out from the handlebar area that seemed to not be used for anything. And then when Bassins confronted the guy, he lifted up the bike. He said, "Can I fill your bike?" And he could tell that just the weight transfer and the distribution of the bike was different than what you would have on a typical bike. So evidently, Christophe Bassins had been investigating this, going into some great length, and then went out and was watching this guy, and he was riding off the front with a junior, a 43-year-old Cat 3, that's come on, that's humiliating. And basically noticed that there was too many people around, quit the race, they accosted him, or they came up and confronted him. He was trying to drive away. They took the bike, and then the authorities were called, and he was basically, I don't know if he was arrested, but he, the bike was confiscated. And it's an interesting interview you should check out on the cycling podcast with Daniel Freeb when he talks to Bassins. He basically he talks about how this is just something that's a little disturbing to him to go about down this area. He also mentions that he believes that the UCI is not doing enough on the mechanical doping issue. And what he meant by that is that he believes it's not necessarily a problem in the pro ranks, but that the UCI is also not doing what they should be doing to stamp it out. In other words, to stamp out the innuendo and the rumor and the conspiracy theories by that. He believes that you should be able to take all these bikes right after a World Tour race, take them all into, confiscate them all, do a complete breakdown, looking into them as well as you can, and basically ruling out that there's no mechanical devices being used. And he believes that the way that it is, with the reports coming out, with the little scanner that they have that is not quite doing it right, that there's other things that could be going on around, and it's leading to more conspiracies. And basically, you can thwart this with a better one-time breakdown of this, random, so to speak. So this whole story, this is really strange. It's really one thing and appalling to drug your body, to cheat. But in the least, you have to put in the work to get faster and stronger. I mean, we saw this Icarus documentary, and this guy does this hot route, and he comes and he ends up doping himself. And he talks about it in a podcast he did with Cycling Tips, where he's like, the difference was not that I was able to feel like rocket fuel was in my veins as I went out and trained, but I would do these hammer rides, and the next day I'd come back, and instead of just feeling deteriorated, boom, I'm fresh and ready to go, and I'm able to train again. So obviously you're able to put on the workload. Well, you still got to go out there and do that. This mechanical biking thing here is a sample of a guy just showing up at the race with a completely different engine. I mean, quite literally. And there are always differences in degrees of cheating and nuance, but putting an actual motor in your bike is seriously deranged. I can't even go down that route. It's a different sport. And so if he wants to do, motocross, by all means, do motocross, but don't expect the motocross riders to be riding pedal bikes. All right. We just had the tour of Turkey, and I'd mentioned this on the last episode, episode 19, about how. Let me give you a breakdown of what the Tour of Turkey is. First of all, it's this year it's 6 stages. This event is dating back to 1963, and you look at the overall winners, it's just a smattering of unknown riders from Turkey, Bulgaria, Poland. And here's what some of the breakdown is. Turkey and Bulgaria both have 10 wins each. The USSR, the former Soviet Union, has 7. Poland with 5. Iran and Kazakhstan with 3 each. And anyway, this was first rated a 2.2 event, UCI, in 2006. That's kind of when it first started to. That's when they were trying to do a little more globalization. And then it was upgraded in 2008 to a 2.1, and now it's a 2.HC on the World Tour. Since 2010, now it's a World Tour race. So it's a bigger event. A lot of riders are going there, and I had mentioned before that I thought there was some funny business with some local Turkish riders that had been caught positive. I went back and did my research. That's exactly what happened. 2012, 2013, both of them were on the same team, the Konyo Torku Sekar Sport team, and they both tested positive for EPO, having won the race and then tested positive thereafter. So Ivalo Gabrowski was the winner in 2012, and then later he tested positive. And I think you look back, he was an older rider, so he had quite an extensive career. He may have even won this race previously, and then he tested positive for EPO. And then the next year you have Mustafa Sayer coming out, and he also wins the race, and then boom, he gets popped for EPO as well. So both of those two winners lost their way and went down the EPO track sorry to bring this up once again, but this Icarus documentary, we followed up with an interview, like I just mentioned, of the filmmaker that he does with cyclingtips.com podcast. And his take is interesting, but he does make some points here that the Russian WADA director, Gregory, and the original stance of the Russian attitude towards doping. So his lab, which was associated with WADA, wasn't to detect drug cheats, but rather to help Russia avoid a positive test. He called it the anti-doping society. So as a state-sponsored system to drug athletes, that was the state-sponsored system, was to drug these athletes way back from the USSR days, and it would be observed